The storm should have killed anyone caught in it. That was the first thought that hit Luke Callahan when he saw the shape half buried in the snow. The blizzard in the 1882 Montana mountains was not weather. It was a living thing, a force that clawed at a man's face, stole the air from his lungs, and buried whole valleys under a white death. Luke had been riding for hours, fighting the wind and the slicing snow, trying to check on his scattered cattle, 3 calves frozen stiff. A yearling buried. Nothing but loss. He was turning back toward his small cabin when his horse stopped dead. Bess tossed her head, snorting, terrified of something in the white blur. Luke narrowed his eyes, trying to make sense of the darkness ahead. It wasn't a rock. It wasn't brush. It was a carriage. A fancy one. The kind city folks used. Not something meant for these mountains. It was turned on its side, broken clean through. A trunk lay thrown open, fine silks frozen like stiff ribbons in the snow. A dead horse lay beside it, its legs pointed to the sky. And then he saw the drag marks. Someone had crawled away. He followed the trail until he found her. A woman, curled in a drift like a frozen bird, face down, still, snow already burying her. He rolled her over and felt the air punch out of his chest. She was young. Her skin pale blue, her eyelashes frozen together, her fine wool coat torn open, useless against the cold. She looked like she'd stepped out of some fancy parlor and into the jaws of the storm. Luke pressed his bare fingers to her neck. He prayed for a miracle. He found it, a weak flutter, barely there. "Come on," he muttered through chattering teeth. "You're not dying today." He stripped off his heavy coat and wrapped it around her. The wind hit him like a knife, but he ignored it. Getting her onto his horse was a fight. Bess reared, panicked by the lifeless weight. He spoke to her low and steady until she calmed just enough. He lifted the woman sideways across the saddle and climbed up behind her. He pulled her tight against his chest, trying to give her every bit of warmth he still had. The ride back felt endless. His shirt was no match for the storm. The cold chewed its way into his bones. Her body felt even colder, like holding a piece of winter itself. When he finally saw his cabin through the swirling snow, it looked like salvation. He fell through the door with her in his arms and kicked it shut behind him. The sudden quiet almost made his ears ring. He laid her on the bearskin rug near the hearth, his hands shaking as he lit a fire. When the flames caught, he turned back to her. Her fingers were white, her boots frozen solid, her lips cracked. She looked like she had already crossed into death and was only half returning. Luke knew frostbite. He knew what it took from a person. He cut away her boots, her silk stockings, her soaked layers of fine coats and blouses. He kept his eyes low, working fast and rough because the cold didn't care about modesty, wrapped her in all the wool blankets he had, forced whiskey between her lips. Melted snow by the fire and rubbed her frozen hands and feet until a painful red color returned. Hours passed. Outside the storm crushed the world. Inside, the fire grew steady, and the cabin warmed. Luke sat in his single chair, coffee in hand, watching her face. Her breathing was shallow, a whisper of life. Near dusk her eyelids fluttered. She gasped awake, eyes wide with fear. She tried to sit up, pulling the blankets tight around her. "Where am I?" "My cabin," Luke said softly. "I found you in the snow." She stared at him, his untrimmed beard, his scarred hands, the rifle on the wall. Her eyes darted around the small room, her throat tightening in panic. "My carriage," she whispered. "And the men? Were there men?" "No sign of anyone," he answered. "Storm covered everything." She swallowed, her voice shaking. "I cannot pay you." Luke looked away, his jaw tightening. Wasn't asking for pay. She drank the hot broth he offered with trembling hands. Her fingers were blistered, purple at the tips. When he asked her name, she hesitated. "Anna," she said. It was a lie. He heard it as clear as a gunshot. But he let it go. "You're safe here, Anna," he said. "Storm's got us snowed in for days." But safe wasn't the word for the tension in the cabin. She watched him like he was a wolf, pacing too close. He moved quietly, used to silence, but her presence filled the small room in a way he didn't know how to handle. Night fell. The wind slammed against the walls. Luke laid his bedroll near the door and told her to take the bunk. "I cannot," she whispered. "It's yours." "You're sick," he said. "Take it." Later he woke to her voice. Soft, broken, tangled in fever, she whispered a name through the dark. "Langley, they took it. The ranch." She gasped awake, wild with fear, trying to scramble away from him. He steadied her gently. "You're dreaming," he said. "You're safe." Her shaking slowly eased. She leaned against him without thinking, her head resting on his chest. Luke froze, then let his hand rest on her back. She felt small, fragile, human. She fell asleep against him. Outside, the storm screamed. Inside, two strangers held on to the only warmth they had left. Morning came slow, the light grey and cold as old tin. Victoria, her real name, though she'd lied as Anna, was sitting upright on the bunk, wrapped in blankets, watching Luke with sharp, guarded eyes. The fever from the night before was gone, replaced by a kind of frightened awareness. She wasn't the half-frozen girl he'd carried in. She was awake, thinking, measuring every detail of the tiny cabin and the stranger who had saved her life. Luke grunted a greeting and stirred the fire. The storm hadn't eased. The wind beat on the walls like fists. "Coffee's hot," he said. "Thank you." "Luke," she replied, her voice still soft but steadier than before. Her hands trembled as she sipped from the tin cup. Her fingers were blistered and raw from frostbite, small and delicate compared to his broad, scarred hands. She wasn't built for this land. He could see that now in every movement she made. "Where exactly are we?" she asked. 40 miles north of Bozeman," he said, adding wood to the fire. "Storms buried the pass. Nothing's moving, for days." Her face fell. She stared into the flames, her jaw clenching. It was clear the storm trapped her in more ways than one. By midday she finally spoke more freely. They were forced together by the storm, sharing the same quiet room, the same fire, the same uneasy air. "I was traveling to Bozeman," she said, sewing a tear in her skirt with the supplies he'd given her. Her stitches were tiny and perfect. "Alone?" Luke asked. "No, I had a driver and a guard." "What happened?" She swallowed hard, her needle paused. "We were ambushed, 3 men. They shot the driver first. My guard fired back, but they pushed the carriage off the trail." Her voice shook. "I ran, I don't even remember how far. I thought they were behind me." Luke listened silently. He knew what fear like that did to a person. He'd lived with it for years. "You ran," he said. "That's why you're alive." She looked at his face, searching for judgment. She found none. The storm raged all day, and by evening, the cabin felt smaller than ever. Luke sat sharpening his knife. Victoria mended her clothes. Snow piled high against the window. Then she added quietly, "My father passed 2 months ago." She didn't look up. "He left me his ranch." Luke froze. A woman owning a ranch wasn't common, and her clothes, her voice, her manners. This wasn't any small rancher's daughter, but she hadn't said the name of the ranch. She guarded that like it was the last warm ember of her life. "Foreman named Morgan," she whispered. "He said my father promised the ranch to him. When I refused to sign it over, he turned the men against me. I left to get the territorial marshal." Luke watched her trembling hands. She looked small, but her voice had steel in it. "You're running from him," he said. She nodded. The next morning the storm finally stopped. Silence fell heavy and bright. Snowdrifts piled taller than a man. The world outside was a smooth white wasteland. "It's beautiful," Victoria whispered. "It's deadly," Luke said. And then they heard it. A long, rising howl. Wolves! Luke loaded his rifle. "Stay inside. Don't open that door unless you hear my voice." Fear flashed in her eyes. "There are too many." "Doesn't matter. They'll come for the mule. And if I lose that, we're stuck here forever." Before she could answer, he stepped out into the blue snow, disappearing around the corner. She rushed to the window, her breath fogging the frost. She couldn't see anything, just pale shadows, and the shed half buried under snow. Then chaos broke loose. A mule's scream, a rifle shot cracking like thunder, a deep snarl, snow flying in violent bursts. "Luke!" she cried, but her voice was swallowed by the wind. More snarls, a man's grunt, a heavy thud, then silence. A long, awful silence. A knock, weak, struggling. "Victoria!" Luke gasped through the wood. "Open the door!" She tore the bar loose and pulled the door open. He fell inside. Snow and blood covered him, his left arm hung useless, torn open by a wolf's bite. The sight of it made her stomach twist. "That is not nothing," she said sharply, grabbing his shoulders. "Sit down." He obeyed. She worked fast, her hands moving quicker than she thought she could. She poured whiskey straight onto the wound, her fingers pressing torn flesh together. He hissed in pain, his whole body tight, but he didn't pull away. "You got the mule?" she asked, tying the bandage tight. "Yeah," he muttered. "Got one of the wolves, too." She looked up at him, her face close to his. The firelight flickered over their shadows. His breath brushed her cheek. Their eyes met. Something unspoken passed between them. Fear, gratitude, something deeper neither wanted to name. His hand slid over hers, warm and rough. She froze. He seemed to realize what he was doing and pulled away quickly. "It'll heal," he said, clearing his throat. Night fell heavy. They tried to sleep, but the storm had changed everything. They were no longer strangers. Not truly. Near midnight he woke to find her standing by the frost-covered window, staring at the moonlit snow. Her shoulders were tense, her breath slow. "You're safe here," he said softly. She turned her head, her eyes meeting his. "I don't think I've been safe for a very long time." He didn't know what to say, so he didn't. She walked back to the cot, but when she passed him, her hand brushed his good shoulder. A small touch. But it was enough. Outside, the world was frozen white. Inside, something warm had begun to thaw. The next 2 days passed in a strange mix of silence and tension. The storm had ended, but the world outside was still buried under walls of snow. Luke checked the cattle and the ridge, while Victoria tended the fire, cleaned the dishes, and waited. When he returned that afternoon, he wasn't the same man who had left. He was pale, breathless, and he dropped a small, frozen leather tag on the table. Victoria picked it up with shaking fingers. The name carved into it stole her breath. Morgan. Her face drained of color. Her secret, the one she had tried to hide in a lie, broke open inside her chest. "He found me," she whispered. Luke looked at her, the truth already in his eyes. "Who are you really?" She sank onto the stool, her body folding in fear and exhaustion. "My name is Victoria Langley." The room went silent. Every rancher in Montana knew that name. The Langley Ranch wasn't just land, it was power, it was law, it shaped the whole valley. Luke felt the world tilt. He had saved a stranger in a blizzard, but she wasn't a stranger at all. Victoria lifted her eyes, tears spilling over. "Silas Morgan was my father's foreman. When my father died, he said the ranch was promised to him. He tried to force me to sign it over. When I refused, he killed my driver and my guard. He destroyed the records. He left me for dead." She shook harder, her hands trembling so badly she had to grip the chair. "They want me gone, Luke." "Gone so they can steal everything." Luke stared at the wooden floor, jaw tight. He had seen darkness in men. He'd lived in it. But this was something else. He moved to the door and pressed his shoulder against it. "They'll be here by dark." Victoria's breath caught. "Can we run?" "Not in this snow." His voice was low and steady. "We make a stand." He gave her the heavy revolver. Her hands trembled as she held it. "I can't." "You can," he said. "Point, breathe, pull." Together they boarded the window, loaded the rifles, and waited. Dusk fell. turning the snow outside into deep blue shadows. Voices broke the silence. "This is Callahan's place." Morgan's voice cut through the air. "Victoria, we know you're in there. Come out, girl." Victoria's heart pounded so hard she could barely breathe. Luke stayed at the loophole, his eyes steady behind the rifle sight. "Stay low," he whispered. Then, movement, a shadow slipping through the trees. Luke fired. A scream tore through the cold air. Gunfire exploded outside. Bullets slammed into the cabin walls, sending splinters flying. Victoria threw herself to the floor, shaking. "Stay down," Luke shouted, moving to the door. A heavy pound shook the wood. "Break it down." Luke held his breath, listening. An axe blade crashed into the door. "Victoria, window!" he yelled, handing her the second rifle. The next axe hit, and the next. Luke yanked the bar aside, ripped the door open, and shot the man mid-swing. The body hit the snow with a heavy thud. He slammed the door shut again, dropping the bar into place as more bullets ripped through the logs. "Two down," he said, breathing hard. "Four to go." More shouting, more gunfire. "Callahan," Morgan roared, "we'll burn it down." Silence followed, a terrible quiet. Then, hoofbeats fading. Luke stayed at the loophole for a full 10 minutes before lowering his rifle. "They're gone," he whispered. Victoria collapsed to the floor, sobbing into her hands. The fight, the fear, the shaking, her whole body felt like it was splitting apart. Luke reloaded with shaking fingers. He wasn't shaking from fear, he was shaking from blood loss. "Luke," she breathed, her eyes widening, "your arm." The beast bite had torn open. Blood soaked down his sleeve. He sat heavily by the fire, his face going pale. Victoria rushed to him, grabbing bandages and whiskey. "Sit still." He didn't argue. She cleaned the wound, her hands steady now, not trembling at all. She stitched the torn skin, wiping sweat from his forehead as he gritted his teeth, and stayed silent through every painful pull. When she finished, her hands were stained with his blood. She stayed kneeling beside him, unable to look away from his eyes. "You saved my life," she whispered. "And you saved mine." The tension between them rose, hot and sharp. The fire crackled softly. His good hand reached up and brushed a streak of soot from her cheek. Their faces were close. Too close. She closed her eyes. He kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't soft. It was desperate, born from fear, pain, and the closeness of death. Her hands gripped his shirt. His good arm wrapped around her, holding her as if she were the only warm thing in the frozen world. When they pulled apart, both were breathless. Night settled heavy around them. She sat beside him. Her head rested on his shoulder. His chin rested on her hair. They didn't speak. They just breathed. But morning brought new danger. Luke checked the ridge and returned ghost pale. "They're coming back," he said. "More men." Victoria stood, her face white. "What do we do?" "We go to your ranch." "My ranch?" "Luke, he's there. It's the only place with walls thicker than this cabin." They packed what they could. Luke's arm was in agony. He could barely lift the saddle. She helped him, her hands determined. They rode out through the snow, taking the hidden trails, fighting the cold and the pain. Luke grew weaker. Fever burned beneath his skin. Victoria held him upright on the horse, whispering to keep him awake. They reached her land by dusk and saw smoke curling from her father's house. "Morgan's inside," Luke said. She swallowed. "That's my home." He led her to the old line shack and handed her the rifle. "Stay here." "No." "Victoria." "No." And before he could stop her, she walked out of the trees and toward the house. Morgan opened the door, laughing when he saw her. "Well, look what the storm dragged in." She didn't flinch. "I am Victoria Langley," she said. "You are trespassing on my land." Morgan stepped forward, his hand on his gun. "Girl, you ain't got no land. This is mine." "No," a voice rasped. "It isn't." Luke stumbled from the trees, barely upright, blood soaking through his coat. He held a knife in his hand, his body swaying. Morgan fired. Luke fell. Victoria screamed. Morgan aimed again, to finish it. Victoria raised the revolver. Her arms didn't shake. She fired once. The gunshot echoed through the valley. Morgan fell. The remaining men dropped their guns and fled. Victoria ran to Luke, falling beside him, pulling his head into her lap. "Stay with me," she choked, brushing his hair back. "Stay." His breath was faint but real. He lived. They returned inside her father's house. She cleaned his wounds, stitched him, saved him as he had saved her. The days blurred, full of pain and long hours of nursing him back from the edge. When the thaw came weeks later, she stood beside him on the porch, two survivors looking out over the ranch they now shared. He tried to leave one evening, packing a saddlebag, believing he didn't belong. She walked into the barn and took his hand. "You are home," she whispered. "You are mine." Luke dropped the reins. And he stayed. Together, they rebuilt the Langley ranch. Together they healed, and together, riding side by side through the summer grass, they found a peace neither had